PTSD playlist, Dr. Robin Kelly, Leak Project.
All right, folks, we have a real treat for you. We have Dr. Robin Kelly with us again from robinkelly.co.nz. Now, he was on the show with us before. We talked a little bit about the human hologram, and we're also going to break into the human antenna. These are two books that Robin has written for us, and it's just a pleasure to speak with you, Dr. Kelly, here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Really good. Thank you, Rex. It's fantastic to be back. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. It's an honor to speak with you. Really appreciated the last conversation we had. And I feel it's so important for people to be aware of other opportunities besides just one specific form of medicine or healthcare. There's many options and opportunities out there now. And I feel like still Big-Pharma has so much power and influence over the masses that unless you're awake or have been warned, you're going to continue to follow things blindlessly. And oftentimes those big pharmaceutical companies, most of the time in my opinion, don't have our best interests at heart. I just recently did a podcast today actually about just a quick 5-minute podcast about how Big-Pharma now is allowing doctors to prescribe OxyContin to children as young as 11. And I can certainly see there, if a child is terminal or they say that he's terminal, he's in excruciating pain, and that's the only option, I'm certainly open for suggestions, yet I do feel like there's probably other options that would be maybe just as good or more so, and I worry about the long-term effects of stuff like this. When they allow these things to come into play, then it seems like you're going to have sales reps that work for these pharmaceutical companies kind of whining and dining certain doctors, and definitely not all of them, but certain ones, and saying, okay, well, you can prescribe them this if they have a toothache, or, oh, if, little Johnny stubs his toe, yeah, just give him some OxyContin, he'll be fine. Now, obviously, that's kind of extreme right now, but I wonder if maybe down the road that'll happen, and I've had two close friends over the past year that were young, and one of them, she just passed a couple weeks ago, a very good religious mom, housewife, 2 kids, 39 years old. I mean, she was 39 years young, and she died because she was taking so many Percocets, and the doctor was prescribing them to her like it was candy. It's just mind-boggling. She didn't need it. She was depressed, and I hadn't seen her in years, so when I found out about it, it was really shocking. But I just feel for people like that, and her parents and her kids and her husband. It's very sad. So it'd be nice to see some options out there. And I've heard of alternatives that are a lot better for people that are good for painkillers and not going to cause a rewiring of your brain and a mess up of your nervous system. It just seems like they're slowly coming out in the market, not fast enough.
Yeah, I think that's right. I've been doing medicine since the mid-'70s, so I've seen this tremendous change. The last 40 years has been a huge change, not just in medicine, but in our world. It's also been the time where there's been this growth of what we call neoliberalism or neoconservatism or neo-Darwinism, all the neo stuff that's come through.
Right.
And when I studied medicine, there was a thought that there was going to be a pill for every ill, that the future in medicine was going to lie in medications. Now, in those days and in the early 80s, the medications were very, very toxic. So instead of the Vioxx and the Nurophens that are now there, which again are toxic enough, they were very toxic. If you took an anti-inflammatory, you would have a high risk of bleeding from your bowel, and we saw many people bleed from the bowel, and some die from those medications. The blood pressure medications were very severe as well, and turned people into zombies. But what's happened is that there's been conditioning of people, particularly my generation and the older generation, into feeling that these drugs were going to be the answer. And by and large, they haven't proven to be. And what's happening now, the pharmaceutical industry is actually facing a crisis in that there aren't really that many new drugs developed. What happens is it comes up with all the side effects that mean that you've got to buy their new version of the drug, which is just a cousin of the old version. Now, people are getting wise to this. And the people that I'm seeing in my practice are actually the ones that seem to have outgrown this cycle of feeling that you had to counteract every ill that you've got with something that suppresses the symptoms rather than stepping back and understanding what's happening to you. So the illnesses of the day seem to be related to what's happened in our lives in the last 40 years. That it means that the lives have speeded up, they've become busier, the body has been conditioned into more fear, more fight, more flight, and that has led to anxiety, depression, and burnout. But it also, the immune system has become overloaded. So environmental factors have become the huge issue. And we're not going to be able to sort those out by adding another chemical into the body. It's going to tip us over into a state of sickness rather than wellness. So the pharmaceutical companies are really in a crisis situation. And I was reading just last night, rereading directives to Big-Pharma, written by PricewaterhouseCoopers, the big accounting firm, about sort of 8 or 9 years ago, called Towards 2020, apologize. If you Google that and PwC, you'll see what their objectives were for this time and in the future. And basically, the big objective was to shift towards immunizations and public health control. And that was really an incentive to keep the pharmaceutical companies going. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this great debate about immunizations and people worried about inflicting these on their children who already are born into this huge toxic load. So that's where we're sitting at the moment. And the intelligent, educated, alert people are questioning this. They're questioning where to from here for health.
And you're working with different forms of medicine, Chinese medicine, Eastern type philosophy as well. Could you kind of talk to us about that? What are some alternatives that people are asking you about and you're presenting?
Yeah, over the years, in 1980 or so, when I started in general practice, I started to do acupuncture. And I found that if I was using simple acupuncture, say on somebody with a sore neck or a sore back, they would come back and say, hey, I had a wonderful night's sleep last night. Or if there were women, they said, look, my period was a lot better this time. And most would say, hey, I feel more relaxed. And I realized that what I was doing was actually switching the body away from this fight, constant state of tension and fear just through the acupuncture and switching the body back into a state of acceptance and relaxation. And of course, we can't be in that state all the time because we've got to go and do stuff, right? So we need a balance between being active and also being receiving. And what's happened in the last, say, 30, 40 years is that the push has been to push us more and more into the state of activity, to busyness, to fear, and hence we're seeing this great epidemic of depression and anxiety. So by simply asking a person to come and lie down, relax, breathe the tummy, and to do some acupuncture along the lines, it's best done along the lines of traditional Chinese medicine, Taoist lines, we'll find that the body switches and relearns a pattern of being, which is far more accepting, far more connected to the environment. And this gave me a chance while we're doing this to instruct people how they can achieve this state on their own, even without the needles. And that's been the move. Maybe move them into any creative stuff that they do where they can forget about the pressures of time, yoga, tai chi, qigong, music. It really, whatever they really feel can counterbalance all this other stuff in their life. So my main work has been to give people those options. Now, for a lot of them, that's got more and more difficult as they have accumulated more and more debt. They have to be more and more busy. And this has turned their body into a natural state. Because they're busy, they're eating fast foods, they're eating foods with preservatives, they're eating foods that have been poorly presented, and there's malnutrition even in advanced cultures or in our culture, because we're eating the wrong stuff. We're eating the stuff that's been produced for profit rather than for nutrition. So to me, my job is one of education and encouraging people into a state of relaxation, which is a joyful relaxation.
So, and that obviously has got to be really good for the body, because stress in and of itself can cause health issues down the road. If you're always stressed out, your body isn't able to relax like it should. And I've heard of, I don't know how true this is, but I heard from somebody once that there was a study that they read about where one family was eating all organic, super healthy food, but they were under constant stress, very little sleep. And then this other family just had, 8 hours of sleep a night. They got along great, but they were eating junk food, fast food, and they were healthier than the other family. So I don't know how much validation there is to that and how the numbers can be skewed, but I certainly think that relaxing has got to be a big part of your lifestyle.
Absolutely. I mean, there's evidence that if you eat at home and what is being prepared for you, and you're preparing food, or the family's preparing food with good intent, then it doesn't matter exactly what you're eating at home. It's healthier. So it's not just what we're eating; it's how we're eating. There's no point in being stressed and then shoving in organic food into you. Certainly, it's a start. It's certainly better to eat organic food, but it's far more complex than that. And I think that what we're seeing and what we're beginning to understand is that things are complex. That say, for instance, to enter into this debate about the MMR vaccination. And the science on one hand, the scientists on one hand saying, hey, no, it's not involved, it's not a cause of autism. And the people who have been exposed, their children have been exposed to the vaccination, who have developed autism very soon afterwards, saying, hey, look, we know, we've seen this. What we should be looking at is the toxic load on every child that's born now into our world, into our so-called developed world. And what they're exposed to, both in the womb and after the womb. We're exposed to pesticides, to herbicides, to the plastics, the phthalates, the glyphosates. Also the accumulated toxic emotional load that we're born into as well. And so what we're seeing is that it's a combination of all these things, the complexity of our environment, the complexity of what we bottled up for years as human beings, that actually makes each generation coming out has accumulated this to a greater degree. And so we need to detoxify people at a very early age now. And that complexity is something that we need to tap into, and we need to identify in each person what the deficiencies are, what the overload are. For instance, if somebody is zinc deficient, there's new studies that show that can lead to the autistic gene being switched on if they're zinc deficient. So what happens if they're zinc deficient and then have an immunization? These studies haven't been done. And we have to understand how complex it is and how primitive in some ways our studies are. We're looking at things in a very linear way when we should be looking at it a much more holistic, with a much more holistic focus.
Absolutely. And the acupuncture has always been pretty neat in my eyes. I've never tried it, but is it true that you can take a certain pressure point in one part of the body and physically affect other parts to the point of it hurting or feeling good?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you can do very good acupuncture knowing about 10 points. In fact, Mao Zedong sent his barefoot doctors into the villages in China, just knowing a certain number of points, probably 15 or 20 points. These weren't educated people. They were trained to use certain points, and they went out in the late 1940s, early 1950s into the villages and used these points as a preventative measure. It was basically their immunization program was acupuncture. So there are some points that are very effective. For instance, as you say, you can relieve a headache by putting a point, liver 3, which is between your big toe and the next toe. And in fact, I teach people to do this, particularly if they're a long way away from my practice. Maybe they're in the country and they have an anger management problem or whatever. You can train them just to use an acupuncture point. That'll reduce their anger, but their tension, but it'll also improve tension headaches. There are points on the ear where you just use one point, which will relieve migraines. So what you learn when you do acupuncture is that there's an intricate network which we believe now is the connective tissue of the body that is a semiconductor, and it's arranged in planes which we call meridians, and that in fact certain points on that meridian can influence other parts. In fact, at the other end of the meridian. So the Chinese have a way of saying that if you've got hemorrhoids or piles on your bottom, you're going to use a point at the top of the head to relieve that pressure because it's the end of the meridian. It's a fascinating system which I really love learning, and actually it has an amazing amount of logic. When people in some way dismiss it as being somehow primitive, They have no idea. They have no idea about the complexity, the study that's gone on, how it's been handed down from generation to generation through master and apprentice, and how it, in fact, is, to me, a more complete system in its own right than Western medicine, which is very reductionist and always going further and further into smaller and smaller fields. Chinese medicine is about balancing the body so that it is in harmony with nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, what you eat, I think, has probably got to be very important as well, especially over the long term. Now, Chinese medicine uses specific yin-yang principles also, right? So if you've got more yang, then they've got specific foods that will balance it out, etc.
Yeah, and that would be right. You could say that our Western lifestyle is more yang. People are more anxious, they're busy, they're rushed or whatever, so that's more yang. So yeah, and again, there's huge logic in what they say. But just a simple tip that I can give to people when I ask a senior Chinese physician when I started to learn this, well, what about diet? Because the problem comes as every country seems to have a different idea of what's important in diet. And a Chinese guy said to me, he said, well, on a plate, make sure you've got all the different colors, all right? So you've got your corn and you've got your carrots, and you maybe have your peppers and you have your... So in other words, when you look at the plate, on a plate of a Chinese food, you'll see different colors there. And that's I thought it was an amazing guide to, and these have got to be real colors, not artificial colors, on how they would view a good balanced diet.
Absolutely. Another thing too, is your blood type affect what kind of foods you should eat?
I think that there is the blood type diet, and I have to say I don't know so much about that. People come in and they're specifically keen for that to happen and to go with their blood type there. I personally haven't seen it being hugely successful. That's from my point of view. But it's not an area of expertise that I particularly have followed. As far as diet's concerned, what's appeared logical to me is that the people have become allergic and sensitive to certain foods. And I wondered why that was the case. So they become sensitive to wheat and gluten and dairy. And I thought, well, these foodstuffs, say bread and milk, when we were in small communities, were probably absolutely fine because we had the baker and we had one or two cows in our villages, and everything was in balance. But what's happened over the last 50 years is that we produced bread to excess. In other words, we produced bread and dairy not to be nutritious for us as a population, but for profit. And our bodies have reacted to that and said, because our bodies are intimately connected holographically to the world, have said, no, this isn't right, this is out of balance. And so we have started to reject that. Our bodies have been telling us what's wrong, what's out of balance in the world. So this is very much a holographic view of things. So it would appear to be that the foodstuffs that we're rejecting are the ones that have been produced with the wrong intent.
That's a great way to put it as far as the balancing goes. I like that because the universe does seem to have a way to neutralize things, balance things out, and fascinating. That's just kind of universe speaking. And I've seen it seems like depression is certainly taken over a lot of people's lives right now. Folks that would be, you think, living the happy lifestyle, leave it to Beaver, maybe not that extreme, but you get the point. Just, and I've seen literally from just close people that I've known recently find out that they're addicted to painkiller drugs and they shouldn't be at that level, but because of the society and everything else that's intertwined, it seems like it's just really hard on some people.
Yeah, I'm interested in addiction just in that I think that every one of us in this life we're sort of addicted to this life, to this these dimensions, this matrix, if you like, and that is understandable because there's a lot of good stuff about it. But the interesting thing is about all addictions is that the heart of them, and I may have said this in our last talk, is our emptiness, is a sadness. For instance, it looks like we're trying to fill a hole of sadness with addictions. If somebody, say, is drinking a lot, and I was talking to a woman last week who is going through, has been on an alcoholic binge, and she's waiting to be detoxed. But what we are trying to do with whatever substance that we're using is try to fill this emptiness. So when we start to detox, or when we take away the drink, or we take away the cigarettes, or we take away our busyness, we start to cry. That is a sign of healing, because we're touching on this emptiness, this feeling of abandonment, this feeling of loneliness, which has been sort of embedded in us probably for many centuries. So at the base of all this is a feeling of separation and a feeling of loneliness, and that is the root of those are the roots of all our addictions. Now, what I would say is that we need, as physicians, as healthcare practitioners, as complementary practitioners, alternative practitioners, to understand this and somehow touch upon this, because when we're miserable, we're feeling very lonely. When we have chronic pain, we're feeling very much alone. The solution to this is not to numb that down, but for us to understand that and then create a system where we're feeling less alone. So that what you're doing with acupuncture is you're connecting people, they're little aerials, so you're connecting them people to the outside world. But we also need to be conscious of how to bring a community together. So a lot of this depression at its heart is a feeling of separation, of loneliness, of not being connected to the rest. And it's almost been drummed into us as this is the way we should go. We should become exclusive. We should get to the top of the tree. We should be better than everybody else. It's been so drummed into us. And that's really what we're seeing. So as we heal from depression, we do touch on that sadness. We start to cry. We realize the depth of the grief that we've held from previous generations. We have to go through that. And that is the process that we need to go through. And we need to support people through this. But people tend to be, I suppose, conditioned into thinking there's going to be an easy fix through a medication. The medication will make us less sensitive to the pains of the world. But ultimately, to properly heal, we need to probably connect to those and then join together so that we can become activists to change that.
Absolutely. And are you noticing people are becoming more in tune with opportunities and options outside of what it was 10, 20 years ago, or is it still pretty much the same?
It's very interesting because I do 2 or 3 different practices every week. For half the time I'm here in my rooms where people are coming, generally they're ready to explore other ways of healing. And that's a big deal for them because usually it means looking at their lives, looking at their relationships and making changes. And they're ready for that. And they're the ones that seem to have outgrown the system where you're seeing a doctor for 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour when all that can really happen is the doctor reacts to your symptoms and maybe prescribes or signs forms or whatever. So those are the people that are coming to me. But I'm also spending time in student health. So I'm seeing 1 day a week young people from all around the world with different concepts of health. Huge numbers of those have anxiety and depression. I'm seeing far more anxiety and depression than I am respiratory illness, for instance. It's endemic, that state of disquiet within the body, and this is very distressing. But it's also gives me the opportunity to feed them some other ways of doing things. And different cultures have a different understanding of how to go about this. And many, like from the Middle East, will carry so much trauma from the past. People from South Africa carry so much trauma from the past. The Chinese have not been informed about their health. Despite me practicing Chinese medicine, most of the young people that I'm seeing from China, although they take herbs, they don't understand how they work. They're actually really wanting Western medicine. They're wanting drugs. They're like we were 30 years ago or so. Very interesting where each different culture is at. But what is joining them now is the internet. And although it's frustrating sometimes because people come having an idea what they could have, which is often the worst case scenario. If they've got a gut pain, it's cancer until proved otherwise. The internet is actually drawing people together and giving them permission to ask much deeper questions. And when it comes to medications, so many people will now research that medication on the internet and see a huge range of effects, side effects. They're really the effects of the drug, and realize that every time you give a drug to somebody, it's a compromise. There is not, that is something that's unnatural for the body. And therefore, it's not always going to be good that happens. So there's a change in the world that's coming from these younger people, even though the system that I'm working in is frustratingly short. Each consultation is frustratingly short. I'm seeing a shift. I'm seeing people beginning to understand what they're carrying, the trauma they're carrying, the toxicity of the world, and they're trying to work out how they're going to live a proper life.
And are you noticing people are getting healthier as a whole or less?
I think we've got new health problems. I don't think that if people are anxious, getting panic attacks, getting depressed, even though they may be going to the gym and physically looking better, I don't think that's particularly healthy. I think there's a determination in people to achieve real health. And that determination builds up when they start to have kids because they want real health for their children. And that is what we're seeing. That's the health revolution. It's probably coming from the mums and the dads, because the intelligent mums and dads, the ones that have had, that have explored these concepts, want to protect their children from the toxicities, emotional toxicities, and chemical toxicities of the world. And they're the ones that are changing things, and they're doing it for the next generation. So I think we're going to see that new generation being brought up, hopefully challenging the old stuff. Because, we haven't done that well. If you look at the rates of cancer, for instance, that have increased due to environmental issues, I'm sure as physicians, we should be activists for this, because we see the end effect of this stuff on the body, which is probably the most important thing that we own as human beings. So I think the answer to that is that the next we're guiding that next generation into helping them living healthier lives. Not easy.
And also it seems like there's a lot of people coming back from war that have PTSD pretty bad. I actually have a very close friend that came back from Afghanistan, and the stuff that he told me, he felt so much guilt, and I felt so bad for him because, when he joined the military, he did it for all the right reasons, and he kind of talked about boot camp. When you get out of boot camp, you're going to war. He said that was kind of like the honeymoon. They had you all mentally pumped up and excited, hoorah, hoorah, go destroy, yeah. And you get out there, and then you come back and you realize that so much of it was disinformation to get you to be, the bitter of somebody else. And the stuff that he told me, it was so sad to hear what he had to say about how he felt about himself. Those kind of things can stick with you forever.
Yes, and I have a great interest in post-traumatic stress, used to be called shell shock or battle fatigue, but also what we call complex post-traumatic stress as well. So sure, there are those examples of people being, I suppose, mind-controlled into a state of being psychopaths, really, at war. In other words, they want to eliminate a compassion for the person that you're opposing, if you're going to be an effective soldier, of course, because if you just hesitate and think you're confronted in in one-to-one contact with another person, if you think, this person has a wife and family, and what's going to happen, they'll shoot you. Okay, so there's a sort of training into that stage of fight or flight where you block out normal human compassionate emotions, and then when you come back home, of course, it all floods back because your normal state is one of compassion, and if you do something, you have guilt because you have a conscience and you come back. So the people who are suffering from that post-traumatic stress are the 95% of compassionate people. In Germany in the war, they gave their front line, the German soldiers were given Pervitin, which was a version of methamphetamine, and they took that on the Russian front. And it did a number of things. It kept them awake so they didn't have to sleep so much, but it also eliminated that compassion for the next person, so it turned them into that psychopathic person. And there's evidence also that Hitler's physician gave him this, among all the other cocktails of drugs and vitamins that he had. So that as the war advanced, he became more and more psychopathic as we went on. So we can see that people, that the wars are set up, not by you and me, but by other people, often by politicians, who don't seem to have any sense of conscience about this fallout effect. That's why I have this interest in psychopathy as well, because I believe that a very small number of psychopaths can destroy a massive amount of people. Look what happened in the Second World War, and what we're seeing now are all around the world. So that post-traumatic stress is linked to that. What I'm seeing in our environment, because we haven't got the military like you have over there coming back with these issues, but we're seeing complex post-traumatic stress. We're seeing many. So I go through somebody's history and say, well, the traumas of abandonment, maybe being left alone as a child, maybe having an operation where they've, as a child, they've been bleeding and they've had trauma, or there's been abuse or sexual abuse. And then you see this pattern repeated, these multiple stressors that have occurred. And that builds up in the person, it builds up in their psyche, but also their immune system. So then something comes along and they start to decompensate. And so that complex post-traumatic stress doesn't just affect their mood, their depression, their anxiety, and it surely does. It actually affects their immune system. It can switch on diabetes, heart disease, cancer. And the thing that joins this together is this feeling of isolation, this feeling that we don't belong. And that is something that has been with us for many generations, from probably many thousands of years, a false feeling that we are separate from each other and from the natural world. So complex post-traumatic stress is what we feel and what the victims feel from a mindset that has been stuck in the idea that we're separate, that we as humans can control the environment for our good because we are special, and that we're not part of nature.
How many more people do you notice in today's day do have some form of PTSD, though? I mean, like you said, you don't have to deal with as many military people out where you're at, but do you see people that are just living your daily routine lives that kind of have a similar type of post-traumatic stress, or could you even compare the two?
Rex, I think we've all got it. That's a shock, I'd say 100%. I think that we've all got a variation of this. It's probably why we're here, is to try and sort this out. Because the evidence is strong now that we inherit this from previous generations. So we inherit the post-traumatic stress that hasn't been resolved from previous generations. My father was a surgeon in the war in Burma. And in the last 2 years, he never talked about it. He died 17 years ago, so he never talked about it. We just got his war records. He walked 1,000 miles through the jungle being sniped at. He was in trenches. He had people around him being blown up, but he was in charge of patching everybody up. And those who weren't shot were actually succumbed to cholera and dysentery and the lot. So this happened in the war, Second World War in India and Burma. As the troops in 1945, after the atom bomb was dropped, they came back through India to go home to England, and many of them had to convalesce in a place called Doolally. I don't know if you know the word Doolally. Doolally now means you're a bit crazy, but this Doolally, they suffered from what they call the Doolally tap, and this was post-traumatic stress. This was shell shock, and they were nurtured in this camp for a number of months. And their records, their medical records, were all destroyed because it was a stigma when they went back home. So this is what I've inherited. I've inherited post-traumatic stress, which, for all the best reasons, my father would have kept from people. So hence they kept it from others through the other addictions like smoking and drinking. And when you think about this pattern, it probably goes back to the First World War, and then to all the other wars that have gone on, going back in perpetuity. So we come into this life with this unresolved sadness. And what is happening now is I believe we're the first generation for a long time that's realized this. And the people, for instance, if we can look at the depressed men, young men around, maybe from the ages of 18 to 30, many are sadly committing suicide, and we're not realizing why this is happening. When I start talking about what they have taken on, that they may well have this sadness at the very time that their grandparents and future generations were going to war and witnessing these awful stuff and bearing this guilt and shame within them. Maybe that they're holding some of this. Once you start explaining that to people, they feel a sense, not of despair, but somehow they feel almost honored that they are the ones that are going to be helping to clear this. And there's a sense, certainly here with indigenous cultures, and the Maori certainly believe this, is that when we clear these things, we're clearing previous generations, the ancestors, as well. So they are being made lighter and healed from this as well. So we start the world like this, and then we experience other traumas of now parents who are having to work, us and us feeling abandoned, and families splitting up or whatever. Everything mounts up. And so I think we're all in this state. We're all in this state. And yet, by our awareness of this state, we can change it.
Absolutely, because being the observer, we also seem to have an effect, and that's been scientifically proven. And I guess I should ask, because you're really into the holographic universe theory, you've written a couple of incredible books, and I want to talk about the holographic antenna. Let's get into that.
Well, when I suppose deep down, we all know this. I think this is ancient knowledge that many of us have within us, and that when we start to explore it and understand it, it makes a lot of sense. And it drew me into Chinese medicine. After all, the phrase "as above, so below." In other words, whatever's there within the body is a reflection of the greater whole, a reflection of the universe. And when you start to do acupuncture, as I may have said before, you put what I call these little needles into people, and it goes through their skin. It actually connects them. They feel more connected to the universe. The little conductors into our semiconductive tissue connects us to the universe, and we are a reflection of that. So we're a reflection of the universe, but also a reflection of the environment around us. For instance, many people, we talked about depression. The depression that we feel people who are sensitive and are not thick-skinned, all right, but actually the creative people, maybe the intuitive, compassionate people, their bodies will reflect the sadness of the world and the tension of the world and the wars of the world as well. And I suppose that is my understanding of why our bodies are doing what they're doing. They're rejecting a manipulation of the world, which isn't in the world's interest. And if it's not in the world's interest, it's not in our interest. If it's not in the soil's interest, it's not in our interest. And so, for instance, if we decide to eat good stuff, local stuff that hasn't been tampered with, that is in season, that supports the local community, it's better for our bodies. Our bodies respond to that and so it's a win-win situation, the heart situation, because the local environment benefits from it and we benefit from it as well. So as above, so below. We are a reflection of all that is and all that ever has been, and that is so much greater than this idea that we are separate individuals. It's far more, to me, empowering and comforting that we're part of a bigger whole. That may well be when we die, our consciousness may well survive in some form, and that we're here in this form to do particular work, to do work on this planet. So that's my understanding of why I think the holographic perception is important. Where I took it was that over the last 20 years or so, it's become pretty well accepted scientifically that this is perfectly feasible. Where I've I wrote my book, The Human Hologram, to say, well, look, it's not just us in a holographic universe. We are holographic as well. So our bodies are holographic. And therefore, it is our perception, our observation of this world that is intricately involved in its formation. So therefore, we are participating by observing, by participating. We co-create this world, but our bodies are involved in that as well. Difficult concept, but I think it's, rather than saying we are just antennae for an outside world, it's a more holistic understanding that we and the world and the universe are all one.
Is that why you think certain objects like symbols and just ancient symbology essentially has so much power and effect, not only because maybe it interacts with a certain part of the mind, but due to just ancient energy compiled with everything else allows it to kind of harness its essence at a primordial level, because we're all interconnected in this holographic essence essentially?
Yeah, I'm very interested in this as well, and of course the religious, icons, the religious paintings of saints and auras and whatever, had an effect on people beyond just them admiring the art. They're almost like the icons that activate software. Yeah, and so healing can often come through looking at art and looking at simple symbols as effectively as using words. Words, I think, are hugely important, but we can get us very much in our heads if we start. So this is why affirmations and prayers need to be felt by the heart. The symbols are incredibly important. And we know that they can also be used badly and maliciously for mind control. So symbols can be both very powerful and connect us to something far greater, but it can also maliciously be used, symbols and codes, to decode us and code us into a certain direction. So we have to be careful about them as well.
And I guess another thing, too, that I find fascinating is when you look at some of the things people are able to do that you could kind of consider superhuman. I was watching a TV show the other day where this elite marathon runner can literally run and run and run, and his body produces the amount of chemicals and adrenaline that it needs to, and the antibodies, is that right?
And endorphins and things, yeah. Yeah. Are you saying really that the human potential, we only just touched on the human potential? I think you're right. I think that we've underplayed it, both on the physical, physical aspects, but also using the genius of thought and intuition. And so I think we are discovering that the limits that we've been placed on us have been so confined, and that's changing. I think we realize that we have unlimited potential, not necessarily physically. There's a limit to what we'll be able to do in our physical bodies, but I think that's what we're discovering. We're discovering that with each Olympic Games, there's a new record beaten. Once we've taken the drugs out of it, I suppose.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. But I think it's our potential. My concern is that although we can do this with fantastic technology, and the information age has produced amazing technology, those people that are pressing for us to work as hybrids with this technology do not understand our potential as human beings without this technology. So we should be very careful to use this technology to enhance all the stuff that we've only just touched on. That's the genius, the creativity. In the holographic paradigm, I suppose, we are instantly connected to all the wisdom of the universe, all that's been and possibly all that will be. So it's an infinitive, there's a huge immeasurable amount of information that we can tap into ourselves. And we've got to be cautious that we do not start putting in nanorobots into our brain that are actually just tuned into certain frequencies that somehow will blot out some of this natural these natural connections that we have, this inspiration, this stuff that makes life so joyful and exciting. I mean, the reason the Beatles and the Stones are so good isn't just because each one is a brilliant musician. Magically, they got together and they started to gel. And great music involves mistakes as well. And it would be awful to think that we're going to be forced into a so-called state of perfection that doesn't have joy or creativity or mistakes in it.
That isn't perfection to me. That to me sounds like the Borg, the assimilation process. Yet that is the definition of perfection. If you think about it, like you said, that's a paradox in and of itself. When you bring it up that way, it certainly makes one think. And I got to tell you, I really appreciate the information you bring to the table. And I would strongly recommend our listeners go to robinkelly.co.nz. You'll have access not only to the human hologram, living your life in harmony with the unified field, as well as the human antenna. And also, I'd like to ask you real quick before we close out tonight, we got maybe about 10 minutes left. What would you like to share with our audience that might give them another gem of knowledge, another key to enlightenment? And, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Well, thank you, Rex. It's a joy. What I'm learning from people coming to see me, they're learning the most from people in their mid-20s. And they're coming to me with what they call the quarter-life crisis. And they're talking about the stuff that I've been talking about today. In fact, a lot of my information is coming from them. Because, and I think this is, I suppose the gem is, this is very important, that we all have a responsibility to make sure that we take humanity in the right direction. I'm sure of that. And I'm in a very privileged situation because by helping somebody's health in the right way, it automatically, in this way, this holographic way, it automatically means that we will have to clean up our environment as well. So I'm just encouraging people to think that way. And that if, in fact, if you're in that age group and you're questioning everything, and even if you're feeling sad and have tears, you are on the right journey. You're on a journey which is honest and authentic. It doesn't mean it's easy because we have to work out how to cope with that and also live a fun life. It doesn't mean not enjoying all the fantastic things this modern world can offer. So that's the first thing. I say that if you're in that situation, you feel that, then the answer to that is to share it. My work really is joining people together. It's to reduce down this isolation, to empathize with them, but also then to draw people together so they don't feel alone. And then, just like with a band, the sum of the parts is much more than the individual parts. The second thing is to talk about this, how we've all got this trauma of separation in us, and that we all have built up a certain toxic load. And that we can sort this out. Well, I think we can detox from this, and as we detox from it, we will feel the sadness, but we'll also feel a lot of joy, and the relationships that we have will be honest and fulfilling. So, as far as it's about having joy in life, having compassion in life. And truly being compassionate to yourself, which engenders good relationships with others.
And folks, I'd also recommend, if you want to know more, go to leakproject.com. Under the guest section, you will actually have a full page there with Dr. Kelly's work also. We had another presentation with Dr. Kelly several months ago. That went very well. We really dove deep into the holographic universe theory on that podcast also. And thanks for everything, Robin. Hope to speak with you again soon.
Thanks, Rex. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Holographic, Illuminati, Big-Pharma, Death Trap, PTSD, latest, Dr. Robin Kelly, Leak Project.
All right, folks, we have a real treat for you. We have Dr. Robin Kelly with us again from robinkelly.co.nz. Now, he was on the show with us before. We talked a little bit about the human hologram, and we're also going to break into the human antenna. These are two books that Robin has written for us. And it's just a pleasure to speak with you, Dr. Kelly, here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Oh, really good. Thank you, Rex. It's fantastic to be back. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. It's an honor to speak with you. Really appreciated the last conversation we had. And I feel it's so important for people to be aware of other opportunities besides just one specific form of medicine or healthcare. There's many options and opportunities out there now. And I feel like still Big-Pharma has so much power and influence over the masses that unless you're awake or have been warned, you're going to continue to follow things blindlessly. And oftentimes those big pharmaceutical companies, most of the time, in my opinion, don't have our best interests at heart. I just recently did a podcast today, actually, about just a quick, 5-minute podcast about how Big-Pharma now is allowing doctors to prescribe Oxycontin to children as young as 11. And I can certainly see there, if a child is terminal or they say that he's terminal, he's in excruciating pain, and that's the only option, I'm certainly open for suggestions, yet I do feel like there's probably other options that would be maybe just as good or more so. And I worry about the long-term effects of stuff like this. When they allow these things to come into play, then it seems like you're going to have sales reps that work for these pharmaceutical companies kind of whining and dining certain doctors, and definitely not all of them, but certain ones, and saying, okay, well, you can prescribe them this if they have a toothache, or, if little Johnny stubs his toe, yeah, just give him some Oxycontin, he'll be fine. Now, obviously, that's kind of extreme right now, but I wonder if maybe down the road that'll happen. And I've had two close friends over the past year that were young. And one of them, she just passed a couple weeks ago, a very good religious mom, a housewife, 2 kids, 39 years old. I mean, she was 39 years young, and she died because she was taking so many Percocets, and the doctor was prescribing them to her like it was candy. It's just mind-boggling. She didn't need it. She was depressed, and I hadn't seen her in years, so when I found out about it, it was really shocking. But I just feel for people like that, and her parents and her kids and her husband. It's very sad. So it'd be nice to see some options out there. And I've heard of alternatives that are a lot better for people that are good for painkillers and not going to cause a rewiring of your brain and a mess up of your nervous system. It just seems like they're slowly coming out in the market, not fast enough.
Yeah, I think that's right. I've been doing medicine since the mid-70s, so I've seen this tremendous change. The last 40 years has been a huge change, not just in medicine, but in our world. It's also been the time where there's been this growth of what we call neoliberalism or neoconservatism or neo-Darwinism, all the neo stuff that's come through.
Right.
And when I studied medicine, there was a thought that there was going to be a pill for every ill, that the future in medicine was going to lie in medications. Now, in those days, and in the early 80s, the medications were very, very toxic. So instead of the Vioxx and the Nurophens that are now there, which again are toxic enough, they were very toxic. If you took an anti-inflammatory, you would have a high risk of bleeding from your bowel, and we saw many people bleed from the bowel, and some die from those medications. The blood pressure medications were very severe as well, and turned people into zombies. But what's happened is that there's been conditioning of people, particularly my generation and the older generation, into feeling that these drugs were going to be the answer. And by and large, they haven't proven to be. And what's happening now, the pharmaceutical industry is actually facing a crisis in that there aren't really that many new drugs developed. What happens is it comes up with all the side effects that mean that you've got to buy their new version of the drug, which is just a cousin of the old version. Now, people are getting wise to this. And the people that I'm seeing in my practice are actually the ones that seem to have outgrown this cycle of feeling that you had to counteract every ill that you've got with something that suppresses the symptoms rather than stepping back and understanding what's happening to you. So the illnesses of the day seem to be related to what's happened in our lives in the last 40 years. That it means that the lives have speeded up, they've become busier, the body has been conditioned into more fear, more fight, more flight, and that has led to anxiety, depression, and burnout. But it also, the immune system has become overloaded. So environmental factors have become the huge issue. And we're not going to be able to sort those out by adding another chemical into the body. It's going to tip us over into a state of sickness rather than wellness. So the pharmaceutical companies are really in a crisis situation. And I was reading just last night, rereading directives to Big-Pharma written by PricewaterhouseCoopers, the big accounting firm, about sort of 8 or 9 years ago. It's called Towards 2020. Apologize. If you Google that and PwC, you'll see what their objectives were for this time and in the future. And basically, the big objective was to shift towards immunizations and public health control. And that was really an incentive to keep the pharmaceutical companies going. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this great debate about immunizations and people worried about inflicting these on their children who already are born into this huge toxic load. So that's where we're sitting at the moment. And the intelligent, educated, alert people are questioning this. They're questioning where to from here for health.
And you're working with different forms of medicine, Chinese medicine, Eastern type philosophy as well. Could you kind of talk to us about that? What are some alternatives that people are asking you about and you're presenting?
Yeah, over the years, in 1980 or so, when I started in general practice, I started to do acupuncture. And I found that if I was using simple acupuncture, say on somebody with a sore neck or a sore back, they would come back and say, hey, I had a wonderful night's sleep last night. Or if they were women, they said, look, my period was a lot better this time. And most would say, hey, I feel more relaxed. And I realized that what I was doing was actually switching the body away from this fight, constant state of tension and fear just through the acupuncture and switching the body back into a state of acceptance and relaxation. And of course, we can't be in that state all the time because we've got to go and do stuff, right? So we need a balance between being active